Welcome everybody, it's Jason Barlow, RMT, and I'm here today as your therapist and as your coach to help you transform your stress, tension, and pain into health, happiness, and vitality. So welcome back. It's been a little bit of a time since I was sharing with you some insights from my book. I took a bit of time here with the summer break for my kids and family, and we did some adventurous things. But I'm here to present to you my step number 10 in the 15-step playbook for pain relief. So over the last number of weeks, I was actually sharing with you a bunch of different insights about you are what you eat. And essentially, I gave you a summary of some of the best tips that I've learned in my 20-plus year career in fitness, nutrition, massage, and pain relief. And the cream of the crop of it all is essentially considering what our early ancestors would have consumed by way of food. There's been more change in the last 60 years in our food than there have been in the many generations before that. Radical difference, in fact. Go read some fascinating books on that particular topic alone. It's mesmerizing. Now, correlating to that is also the mesmerizing amount of increase of disease, considering we're in the 21st century. So what's going on there? And from a nutritional standpoint, we've got to factor in how much of a change there is in our diet relative to the little change in our evolution in the millions of years of the evolution of mankind. Our digestive system, biology, physiology, chemistry, isn't too much different than our very, very early ancestors. And so given that consideration, we're now bombarding our entire body with foods that we've not evolved technically to consume. And so there's been a radical change in what we are delivering by way of food into our digestive system, but there's not been a correlating evolution of the digestive system to compensate for that. Now, there has been compensation in the sense of a negative effect. That's why, from my point of view and experience, and I say it confidently, increased numbers of cancer patients, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, these huge diseases in the Western world have to be pointed toward partly the foods that we're actually consuming. So Weston A. Price, in his great research that I shared with you a few weeks ago, explores this very essence that, all of the different populations of indigenous cultures around the world, they eat very specific to the foods that are available to their biodiverse environment. There is no availability of crops per se in Alaska, where Eskimos are surviving on a lot of mammals, a lot of sea vegetables, and very little to probably no crops that they're able to grow, that they're able to produce themselves some grains. But they're leading, think of a pure Eskimo, they're leading a very healthy way of life, and their biology is tied directly into their consumption of the foods, and it's ready to accept. And think of the pure generations of people that have been eating that way. Then we have symmetry, we have balance, we have harmony in that physiology, and as a result, it's very hard for cancer to take hold of a body that has that chemical makeup by way of the foods being consumed, coupled with the pure lineage from the people that are in that area, and the culture and so forth. Whereas most people in the Western world, right? I emigrated from the UK. My wife's family's come from Poland. Our kids now reside in Canada. There's this mishmash, putting it in a very short, condensed way, mishmash of different genetics being put together. So it becomes harder then to really dial in what types of foods are going to suit me versus my wife versus my child versus child 2 versus child 3 versus child 4. And we all have to eat very specific to our requirements from our physiology. Now, this is going down the rabbit hole fairly deep on a nutritional standpoint. So if you're intrigued in that, I highly recommend go study Dr. Weston A. Price's books. Go study William Walcott and the metabolic typing diet, because they'll dive so deep into nutrition. It goes far beyond just even the foods we're consuming. What about what we're actually putting on our skin, what we're showering, and the water that we're exposing ourselves to, the water we're actually consuming? There's so many elements, and I've studied fairly extensively a lot of those things. I don't follow them all 100%. It's just, for me, it's just not practical. But I do the best that I can in all those areas. And that's where I'm going with this, is that ultimately, when we get into step number 10, we're specifically looking at sugar. Now, sugar is a huge one. In Dr. Weston A. Price's research, the native or indigenous cultures would call those white men's food. The processed milk, the processed sugar, and refined packaged foods with lots of ingredients. They called those white man foods because it was white man very much that introduced it, right? White man that could become rich from making these types of foods and seeking out the source on a bigger scale and creating the farms and so forth, generally speaking. So they called the white man's foods. So sugar comes in various forms, as I'm sure you're probably already aware. The biggest one that we're trying to eliminate, ideally, and at least minimize in our diet is the refined white sugars. That's the biggest one. And then add in there these sugar substitutes. There's Splenda, and there's probably several others out there. There's got aspartame, right? These sugar substitutes that contain aspartame, those are a definite, for me, a no-no. Like I just avoid those to the best of my ability. There might be some that come in sometimes of like, I didn't realize that was in there, and I avoid it next time. So those particular sugar substitutes with aspartame, I highly recommend just keep that out completely. That is one that I would highly recommend eliminate. But sugar, we're all going to have some level of exposure to. Again, it comes down to it's the dose that makes the poison. Hey, if you've been reading my book, these are tidbits that I'm throwing in these videos that you can pick up for free in my book. If you go download it, it's still available for free at jasonbarlowrmt.com. If you want the physical copy, go to Amazon. And we're on step number 10, which is food hazard number 1, sugar. So taking sugar out your diet, that's a huge one. It's a huge one because there's so much that comes with sugar consumption by way of addiction. I know I've experienced that, right? As a child, I ate a lot of chocolate, but I was also very active. That helped control that sugar from plaguing me and being an issue on a biological level in terms of creating a diabetic response, an insulin reaction. And also in terms of gaining weight, I was very active. So I was consuming and burning sugars readily, almost by the second, it would seem, if you ask my mum. The problem came for me as I got older is I was just hooked. I was hooked on the drug of sugar. You can go and explore. I think one of the best books about that is called Sugar Blues. And sugar is comparable to heroin on a molecular level. So think of how addictive heroin is. Am I mixing that up? Is it cocaine or heroin? I want to say it's heroin if I'm correct in saying that. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, a drug, an illegal drug by all accounts, is comparable to sugar. And sugar creates a addictive quality because when we eat sugar, whether it's in a fruit or it's in an artificial, in a chocolate bar, what it does is we consume and it stimulates a part of the brain called the apostat. And the apostat's job is to basically say, okay, sugar has arrived, that's stimulated a response and I want to eat more. But the apostat just kind of says, okay, I'm going to let you keep eating until nutrition arrives. The problem is, for the most part, when we have sugar in these various forms, nutrition never actually arrives. So that's why we can usually eat to the point of then, I'm ready to throw up. Because the brain is not yet registered that you've consumed nutritious food. So we basically get to the point of feeling completely full, or we just have the sugar high that stops us, hopefully, from eating too much or going beyond that. But if we eat food that has a level of natural sugars, but it also delivers nutrition, we naturally find a satiation point and we stop eating it. So the biggest problem we face when we have sugars is we're just not eating it with nutritious food, or it's not in the nutritious food. And as a result, we can continue to eat more and more and more. So what I recommend, this is my little tidbit for you, and I didn't put this in my book, so it's extra. When I have my chocolate, because I still like to have my chocolate, I strive, a couple of cheat days a year, usually my birthday and Christmas, I strive to eat that chocolate after a meal that's had a blend of fat and protein and some carbohydrate. Or if I am going to eat it on an empty stomach, or maybe it's a little snack in between, then what I would do is I would eat it and then I would be active straight after. So I'm eating it. It's going to be quick to digest because it's sugars, right? Very sugar-based, very carbohydrate-based. So it's going to get into my system quick. So I'm going to go burn it. So I get the satiation and the taste and the satisfaction from having had it. But then I go do activity to burn the fuel off, the sugars off, before my body's had a chance to go, you've got enough sugar. I'm going to store this as fat. So a little strategy there. So sugar is our number one nemesis if you're dealing with any kind of stress, tension, and pain. Why? Because it has huge ramifications. It's a very pro-inflammatory type of food. It gets into all these webs in our body that causes disarray. It just does that. And here's a little interesting statistic that the average American consumes over 100 pounds of sugar every year. Now, this is from a few years ago, this statistic, so we can probably say that that's gone up. It's as addictive and poisonous as nicotine or heroin, and is responsible for modern plagues ranging from depression to coronary thrombosis, heart disease. And then, very clearly, and this is from a research that I've done, it can be labeled as our generation's greatest medical killer. Now, a person will hear that and go, okay. It's not applicable for me. And that's what sugar does. And very often what a lot of foods that aren't suiting us, and even the thoughts, right? These are subtle. They're so subtle. We just negate when we hear the term. It is labeled as our generation's greatest medical killer. We have to let that sit. We have to let it percolate, right? We have to let that brew in our mind. If you think about that often enough, you should find a point where you go, I want to reduce the consumption of this because it's not serving me. It's not serving me. Maybe right now you are symptomatic, so that should be a strong, compelling reason why. Or just think about, if I continue to eat this way and I'm gaining weight right now, what's going to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now? Because the research is there, the evidence is there. But what's not happening right now is we've not generated a compelling reason from our own side. And I'm here sharing the reasons in this step number 9 for you. You just got to go digest them, like the pun. Go digest them. Let that sit with you. Meditate on it almost, and contemplate it. Read more about it. But you've got to convince yourself. I'm here trying to convince you, but you have to convince yourself that this is an important step, and arguably one of the most important when it comes to nutrition, which is why it's the first one in the nutrition recommendations. Okay, I could go on, but I'm going to zip it here. Maybe I'll do a part 2 of this. But thank you very much for joining me. I do hope you found that a benefit. My stabilizer's going all wonky here. So thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate your time and energy. Please do, again, comment, share, give me a thumbs up. Give me any kind of review that you wish. Maybe it's something, hey, think about doing this, Jay. Anything to help improve what I'm sharing with you in a way that I can. Thank you again. We'll see you soon. Take care.